I was gonna make this the grand finale, not the grand finale, but like pause for summer, end of season for the
Then you
summer.
have to end on a good cliffhanger. You,
Nobody tells me these rules.
you know, have you not watched television?
Just kidding.
You
Yes,
listen to
I
TV?
watched. Yes, I watched TV. However, the New York Times just came out with a limited series podcast called The Protocol. And I think it's 5 episodes. And I asked you to listen to the first one to talk about today. I thought it might be worth, maybe this won't be the summer series finale. I'll record a few more so that we can talk about each of those episodes because I think they're worth talking about. I want to start out by saying that I have reservations about the New York Times. They have put out information on transgender issues that have medically not always been accurate.
How so?
And the way I didn't reread the articles recently, so I can't get super specific. The way that they talked about puberty blockers was not completely accurate and portrayed well
In the podcast or in general in the
in previous articles.
okay.
Mhm. And in the podcast, when I first listened to the trailer, I was like, okay, right away, there were two things that just hit me that I was like, this is already presenting itself in a biased way against the transgender community. And I don't, in fairness to them, I don't know if they're doing it to be sensational, which also is a pet peeve of mine on any side of the aisle when people skew the facts and the news to be sensational. I don't like it. I'm a very matter of fact person, so I like my news matter of fact. But right away, there were two things in the trailer for the podcast that I thought, it just tells me to listen very, very carefully at what's being presented. And one of those two things was in the first episode. So I asked you, Bandit, to listen to the first episode, and I thought we could talk about it just to give the listeners some background. This limited series is about the gender affirming care protocols that are in the United States, how they started in the Netherlands, how it came here. And basically, they're reporting on what has happened with the gender affirming care protocols starting in the Netherlands and coming here. And that's what it's about. Let me start with you. What did you think about the first episode? And maybe we should say a little bit about what the first episode focused on. And what did you think about it?
I thought it was interesting because I knew nothing about any of it.
So, what was it about?
It was about the origin of medical care for transgender youth.
Right.
The first hormone blockers and the first person that took the hormone blockers, which I thought was really interesting.
Right. Exactly. And how that all began, what made them think to do this. Yes. So that's what the first episode is about. And listening to it, did you think it was biased? Did you think it was balanced? What did you think?
No, I didn't think it was biased. I thought that it presented the facts pretty matter of factly. I thought they had the audio of the interview with the doctor and she was just pretty straightforward.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
I agree with you. I think when they speak to the people, they sound very matter of fact.
Yeah.
But the one thing that was in the trailer
Mhm.
that came out in that first episode that got my attention right away is something really, really subtle, but it has been used a lot to go against gender affirming care for youth. I think they said something along the lines. It's only been 2 decades that gender affirming care has been in the United States before it is being taken away. I talked to you a little bit about this before. We didn't get too into details because I wanted to record it, but it's the word only. It's only been 2 decades. And that word only implies not much time. Now, you can go ahead and share what you said when I mentioned it to you.
Well, I think that you can read it one way, but I can read it that it's something that wasn't around very long and they're yanking it away.
Here's my issue.
Mm.
From a medical perspective, 20 years of having a medicine is actually a pretty long time. We use a lot of medications right now that are way younger than that. So using the term only to make it seem like it's not that long of a time is really misleading. That's the first thing. Ozempic is a great example. Ozempic is way younger than any of the medications we use in gender affirming care. The protocol, it's the 2 decades is a protocol. It's not even the medications, it's the protocol because as you learned, we've been using these medications for a long time for other reasons.
Because you're coming at it from a different background, though,
Correct.
and you have that knowledge, whereas
Correct.
I have no medical background. So to me, like, I have no frame of reference for pretty much how long anything's been around except for COVID shots, because I remember when those came out. I think to laymen, I don't know if people know and understand that.
That's my complaint.
Okay.
That's my concern. To use language like it's only been 20 years is sensationalizing, is making it seem like short term when you know one of the reporters has been researching this for years, has been reporting on this topic for years. It is known to that reporter that one of the biggest arguments against gender affirming care is and they even use this term in the trailer, it's experimental. That term drives me insane because it's not experimental. It's been around a lot longer. We've used it in similar capacities. It's been used in other countries for longer than what we've used it. So in the medical world, we wouldn't define this as experimental. And yes, that's coming from my perspective. But I think as a journalist who has been reporting on this for years, you have a certain amount of responsibility. So that's my take.
Have you ever reached out to them and said anything?
Just listen to it. This just came out this week.
Okay. But it sounds like what you're saying, this isn't the first time that you've had an issue with some aspect of the reporting.
The previous reporting, a lot of people responded to. There was a signed letter from some of the other reporters from the New York Times speaking up against this even, and other advocates and writers like well known spoke up against. So they didn't need me.
Aw, don't sell yourself short. They needed you.
Okay, whatever. That's what I mean about those little subtle things that were in there. But okay, what I found fascinating about this story was, did you catch the age? So they go to find the first patient ever that was given at age 13 puberty
Right.
blockers, right? Did you catch how old he was?
Now or then?
Now.
Now he's in his 50s.
Right.
Yeah.
So they must have received this in the 1980s.
Well, that's what they said, right?
Mm-hmm. Which, again, not experimental. That was experimental. For using it for this way, yes, that would be a correct use of the term at that time. It had been used for precocious puberty. So the concept of stopping puberty, it had been used for that. But I've looked at this before. I think they started using it for precocious puberty around the 70s, 80s. So it was around that time. It wasn't brand new at that point, but it was newer at that point. So that was fascinating to me. I had no idea that was the first patient was that long ago. But one thing that irked me is they made it very clear that this person did not want their identity to be known.
Right.
They even said that there was a conversation before they met him that maybe he didn't want his voice to be heard or his voice to be distorted,
He's in a
right?
European city that we're not going to name. And right, we know that maybe he lives in an apartment with cats and dogs.
So that's what bothered me. That to me as a journalist, I thought was extremely irresponsible. They gave a
How so?
lot of details away. So they come in and they're like, oh, he's on the top floor of his apartment building. Oh, he's got a dog and some cats. Oh, look at these great windows with all the lighting.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say they probably ran whatever details like that by him before they decided what to say.
I put money they did not.
Ooh.
I put money they did not. They're going to pull. We didn't say anything about him. And the only things they did say about him were stuff that had been recorded and they made a point of saying this, that had been recorded in the medical literature when the doctor had reported of the first patient in the medical literature. So saying that one parent was Italian, one parent was English, they talked about that was already mentioned in the literature. But all the comments about the apartment were kind of a little bit early on, I don't think because it wasn't about him. And so for most people, that won't out him. But he said that most people close to him don't know. Only those really close that need to know. So I can imagine he's a physician. Maybe you learn that a parent's Italian, parent's Irish. I don't know. You go visit him. Oh, he's top floor of his apartment. Dog, cats. Sounds a lot like that New York
Yeah,
Times.
that's yeah, you're reaching. You're reaching.
I don't
Yeah.
think I am. And maybe it's because in medicine, and not to say because there's many healthcare providers that really stink, although HIPAA kind of helped this a little bit, but would talk about patients. We were always told, like, even if you are in the hallway in the elevator talking about a patient that you know that nobody is related to that patient in your area, you still don't talk about patients because even though they may not know the patient, they may think they know the patient. They may think you're talking about somebody they know. So you just don't talk. And I think that it's unnecessary details because he didn't distort his voice. So people will listen and people will start putting things together. And it's adding those extra details that will help them put it together. And I think that was just unnecessary to give anyone any extra details than what was already in the literature.
Now I think you should find out if they got permission.
They're not going to tell me.
Huh?
So anyway, what else? What else did you learn from that?
From listening to the guy, I can't remember, who was it, FG or something, whatever
Yeah, I think that's
the
the
initials
FG.
were.
Mhm.
Um, seems pretty okay, right? Like, seems to have had a pretty good life.
Yep. And I thought it was funny when they were like, "You're in healthcare, right?" And he was like, "Yeah, it was written that I was a doctor, right?" In the literature when they talk about him, that he became a doctor. And the way they said it, it's not clear if it was a medical doctor or a PhD, some form of doctor. And he said it's code so that you know, like, he turned out okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I liked his old man
Go
complaint
ahead,
at the
say it.
end about the young whippersnappers who are just kicking up this gender stuff, this third gender or whatever he said, just because it's fashionable. Um,
Yes, he made a comment that I did not agree with, but he's entitled to his opinion that he's concerned of what is happening to the movement because of this younger generation that is, yeah, he said making it seem fashionable, I think was the term.
and I think he punctuated it with "get off my lawn."
No, he did not. But it was that feeling. The fashionable thing is such it got my attention because it's a little bit, again, from the media, anti-trans rhetoric, the social contagion. It has that kind of feel for it. I understand where people latch on to that idea, right? Because the age in which kids are going through puberty is also an age where there's a lot of peer conformity. But I don't think this is an area where a lot of people conform. They may explore and they may question, but I don't think this is an area where people conform.
Well, I think it goes back to, I think we talked about this before, about now because of the world is so connected, people can find each other easier, people can shout out louder. And in the 80s, when this guy was beginning the journey there, the
He
world was
was it,
bigger. There was no community like there is now. Am I
right?
right? So, I mean, how much does that play into somebody looking from the outside in going, these kids today, I don't know.
Yes, and I think I come from a unique perspective because I do work and facilitate support groups of or have with families that have young kids, like kids prior to puberty. And so I've heard a lot of their stories, and a lot of their stories, their kid's the only one in school. And maybe it's because that age group that they're not connected by computer. So it's a very unique group of people. So a lot of those explanations don't really fit in this group. And yet these kids come out and they're saying, "This is who I am." They may never have heard of the word transgender. I think what's different is when we were kids, the response might have been a little bit different, right? Like, "That's dumb, be quiet," or like, "Stop, go change your clothes,"
It was
or
a less sensitive time, and nobody used seatbelts.
all of the above. So, yeah, parenting was more authoritarian. I mean, let's just call it as it is. And I'm touched very often by people that come into my comments and open up and share their story and talk about their transition in my comments and saying, "I wonder what it would have been like if I had been able to transition as a child." And I've had the great fortune of being let into people's lives to see that and watch it, and nothing nefarious is going on. No lives are being ruined. Kids are happy. You want to be called this? Okay. And they're playing. They go off and play. The idea that kids are more connected, and I think that's true for the teenagers. Having said that, I don't think that makes people transgender. I think it makes them more aware of making sense of what they're feeling. I've had the fortune of talking to people of all ages that have transitioned for years. I've listened to people's stories. And many people I've heard say, like, "I just didn't have the language. I just didn't have the words. I didn't know what was going on." And so I think that's what makes it a little bit different and helping people feel less alone. Do I think some kids might explore and not be transgender? Absolutely. I absolutely do. But I also don't think there's harm. When I say exploring, that doesn't necessarily mean medical care. That's why there are teams. That's why there are discussions. But I will say, I think the biggest shock to me, we've talked about gender affirming care in kids started here, I don't know, around like 2015, 2013,
When you say started
2010
here in
in
the
the
United
United
States,
States. In the United States, probably around the 2010s, somewhere around there, the protocol was brought here. But I thought it started there in the like 1990s.
I
So
think
to
that's what
he- is that what
they said. Yeah, I believe that's what they said.
So to hear this case to do in the 1980s was like, that was eye-opening.
See, and I think overall that the episode painted everything in a pretty positive light.
I
I
agree.
understand you have your issues, but I think overall it wasn't a story about somebody who committed suicide because they made a wrong decision, or if they really wanted to make it bad, I suppose that's a direction they could have gone, right? To get the worst case scenario.
I agree with you that it was nice, but it was nice because it focused on the tale of this person and the tale of the other person. Some people might not have liked what he said, your old man comments, I think is as you put it, right? Like, third gender. I give him credit for saying, "Hey, but it's not my perspective. And
Yeah.
rationally speaking, I understand it's not my perspective and I don't know enough about it." So I just want to give him credit for
Sure.
recognizing
And to be
his.
fair, who doesn't hate kids, right? Yeah. It's true.
Anyway. Anyway, I give him credit for all of that. And yes, so I do think it was good because of the focus on him. But when one of those reporters talks, and there'll be more examples in the future, she has a tendency to make comments that I would argue demonstrate her bias, whether she's aware of it or not, towards a little bit of an anti-trans slant. And I don't know if it's to be sensational or not, but I don't appreciate it. I think now more than ever, we don't have room. Like, we have lost so much ground legislatively. We don't have room for these kind of journalistic errors. We don't have room to be sensational. We need the facts. People are already painting untruths. People are already painting these pictures of they're experimenting on kids.
Yeah,
And
but
I think
even when they have the facts, they're ignored. So
you don't need to add into
no, I
it
agree. I agree. I
because
understand.
that's the other thing is that at some point things start somewhere in medicine. We act like things are experimental, but at some point the first fetus had a heart surgery in utero. That's crazy dangerous. But it had to start somewhere. Someone had to be patient number one. Someone had to have the first transplant. Someone had to have the first C-section. I can tell you it didn't end well. First one. But like it starts somewhere. And I'm not saying that to just like throw caution to the wind and be like, who cares? I'm just saying to put it in perspective. No one's saying who cares, but it's weighing things out, the benefits. And I think that the most frustrating part of all this to me is to throw an entire form of healthcare away. To say nobody gets it. We're concerned that some people will get it that shouldn't get it, so nobody's going to get it. And if you truly look at the data, even listening to that report, you can't argue, and tell me if you disagree, you can't argue that people benefit from this care.
Yeah, but again, if the people who are in charge, these people who are voted in, they don't seem to care. And I think at the end of the day, that's what matters, right? Like we're at a point, and I don't know if this has ever happened in history, where experts are being ignored left and right in everything, right?
Yes. But that's, I guess for me, that's why I speak to people. And I'm not speaking high up because sometimes you make the change from all the rest of us up. Because if people start changing the way they vote, changing what they're asking for, changing what they understand, maybe it'll change.
That would be nice. A lot of people, a lot less anxiety.
That would be nice.
Uh-huh. Honey.
All right. Well, I think the episode 2 will be talking about how the protocol got formed. So they talked about patient number 1, but the next one will be how they decided to form the protocol.
Okay, don't spoil it.
That's all. I'm
That's
just saying. That's it.
I don't know what happened to it. I had it hold up. There it is, right there. Okay, yeah. Yes. And to be fair, the
Be fair.
description of the episode ends with a former patient describes the benefit of early treatment in a society that is still hostile to trans people.
I do think they try to be balanced. They try. But again, I'm going to point out a lot of things that I think, oops, you did it again.
Oh. Not that innocent.
I'm glad you got the reference.
It's too easy.
All right. Thanks, Bandit.
All right, boss.